Today's episode is a conversation with Mike Wilson. Mike worked at Environment Canada for many years, and then he became the executive director of the Smart Prosperity Institute at the University of Ottawa, and they have done some amazing work. So I think you're going to really enjoy the conversation with Mike.
Okay. So, hello, Mr. Wilson. I'm very thankful that you were able to join us today, and thank you for participating in this podcast interview.
It's a pleasure. Absolutely.
So, could you please just start off by providing us with a brief summary of who you are and the types of jobs you had, education, maybe any hobbies, interests?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I'm Mike Wilson. I guess I'll start from the start and go to the end. So I'm trained as a lawyer and had a specialty in environmental law. I worked a short time as an environmental lawyer and then moved into government. I worked in a political office. I was advisor to the Canadian Environment Minister on pollution, international issues back in the late 1990s. So it was cool. Like I was there when the Kyoto Protocol for Climate Change was signed, for instance. I went from the political level into the bureaucratic level in government. I worked for Environment and Climate Change Canada for about 10 years, usually in strategic policy roles. But for the last part of my career there, I ran the environmental assessment program. So the program that looks at major resource development projects. I was the director general for that program. I'd always had a sense that, creating the right laws was really important, but at the end of the day, it was the market that made big decisions on whether the environment gets protected or not and how it gets protected. So I'd always had an interest, and I'd always actually in government had a couple little programs going on how you could motivate corporations to do better for the environment. And so I got a chance about 15 years ago to leave government and go to a new organization that was starting up called Sustainable Prosperity. We switched it while I was there to Smart Prosperity, but it was a think tank and a research institute focused on how do you switch market signals so that they incentivize and motivate better treatment of the environment. I was the executive director of that for 12 years. And I've recently left that and am in a semi-retirement. So my wife and I, she had an environmental consulting firm she sold. I left Smart Prosperity and we're starting an endeavor together called Positive Futures. And it's going to look at the intersect between youth mental health and job opportunity, youth mental health and how to help young people get on a good track to good jobs, productive members of society, but through their interactions with nature. So either by spending more time in nature, helping with nature conservation, helping with nature restoration, because we know that, we're kids are facing a lot of anxiety and stress these days. They're sometimes having a hard time finding their path. And we know the connection with nature is both good for their mental health, but also really good for grounding them and helping them find an interesting set of career opportunities that might be unknown to them. So we're just in the really early stages of scoping up what we're going to do. It's probably going to involve mostly volunteer work on our part and a little bit of philanthropic giving that we'll do to organizations that are trying to move into that youth mental health and nature conservation space. And yeah, my hobby's quite active. We like to spend a lot of time outdoors, the normal things that a lot of enviro types do, like a lot of hiking, mountain biking, skiing, just try to lead a healthy, active lifestyle. That's probably longer than you wanted.
No, it's all good. I really appreciate it. With this new project that you and your wife are taking on, do you think there's any specific skills from the Smart Prosperity Institute that will really help you with that creation of the project?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think at its heart, a lot of the work we do in the environmental movement is creating momentum around issues by understanding positive pathways to change and recruiting like-minded people to help in that. And I think any environmental cause that we work on, we want to do that. So when I was at Smart Prosperity, we ran a large research network, the largest research network in the country in that environment and economy space. So I learned a lot about how you work with others, both on your terms and on their terms, and how do you recruit people into a movement that you share a lot of common objectives in, but you might not share all objectives. So how do you work with other people? The other thing I really learned at Smart Prosperity was how to build the analytical case for what you're doing. Like most people in an ideal world would want to protect the environment, but it's often the economics of it, the costs and the inconvenience that get in their way. So we spent a lot of time at Smart Prosperity building the business case, building the investment case, building the rationale for why we should act on climate change or why we should try to spur innovation in the environmental space. And we got to a point where we could explain to investors and to companies why it really was in their interest to do this. And I shouldn't even say explain to them, how we could work with them to develop with them that investment case and that business case for the type of policies that we wanted. And I think in this new space that we're in, like youth mental health and nature, I think people instinctively understand that being in nature is really good for young people. I think they also instinctively understand with the pressures of social media and the internet and being online, kids are spending less time in nature than they used to. But one of the things I think we'll spend some time doing is trying to pull the evidence and the data to try to quantify how and why that's a really good idea. Years ago, there was an organization a colleague of mine ran called Pathways to Education, and he spent a lot of time trying to quantify the benefits of having at-risk youth have access to better education systems. And he was able to create like costed social benefit to putting money into better education programs that are aimed at risk youth. And we'll probably do a little bit of that, trying to validate this value proposition that we're putting forward, that young people can be a real contributor to conservation, develop a nature ethic. And that's actually really good for them personally, for their mental health, but also good for their career and their ability to move forward in their life.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thank you. So I wanted to touch a bit on your education to just kind of stray away from the career professionalness. So I noticed you obtained an LLB from Western. I'm going to assume that that's the law degree, kind of, right? And then an MES from Dalhousie. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Could you just briefly maybe explain what those degrees are? Because I personally didn't know, my partner didn't know. And what are some really beneficial skills you think you gathered?
Okay. And I'll describe my path a little bit too, because I think it's interesting. I don't know if really, I think it's interesting. So I'd said my first degree was actually in business. I did an undergrad in business.
Oh, okay.
And my intent, what I thought I was going to do was something very business oriented. And I went to Western to law school thinking I was going to be a corporate lawyer. And Western had a well-regarded corporate law program. And I was in it working a summer job. I think it was after my second year of law school. I was working at a center where we taught canoeing, rowing, and kayaking on the St. John River in New Brunswick. And the lead canoe instructor, we'd spend every afternoon just out in the boats out on the river. And he said to me, he goes, I don't know why you want to be a corporate lawyer. Like doesn't seem to be your passion at all. And it was honestly the first time that it struck me that you really should you should study something and look for a job in an area that you're really passionate about. Until then, I just thought a job was something you did from 9 to 5 or, 8 to 6 to make a living. And he said, there's this new emerging area, environmental law, like that seems way better suited for you. So he put me in touch with a lawyer in Toronto who was a really well-regarded environmental advocacy lawyer. And I called him and he explained to me, there's this growing very new field of environmental law. So as best I could, I switched my focus when I was at Western to environmental law. There were like two courses offered at the time in environmental law. It really was a new area. This was in 1991. It was a new area. But the other thing that this lawyer told me, he said, and if you really want to do public interest environmental law, which is what I wanted to do, both defending people that had environmental issues, but also trying to inform environmental laws and policies, that you really have to understand environment well. And you're not going to get that just through a law degree. So he suggested I do a master's in environmental studies. And that's what the MES from Dalhousie was. I went to the School of Resource and Environmental Studies there and got a very multidisciplinary general degree in environmental studies. And it just gave me like a little inkling of what is environmental assessment? What is sustainable development? What were some of the like the academic foundations of the environmental movement. We did some research methods, things like that, and just really tried to become educated in environment. So that's the MES degree, and it really did, I think, help me become a better environmentalist. This is advice that understanding the law isn't enough. You really, if you're going to represent like environmental groups and nonprofits, you really need to understand their issues well, because what you'll find is they care about them deeply, but they don't always have the technical knowledge that you need to create a good lawsuit around it. And that's what I started to learn there. So I found the law degree and the environmental studies degree work together, even though I really didn't practice law much at all. I practiced for 1 year because I got really taken by the public policy space.
But I'm sure
So
that
yeah,
1 year still provided you with skills that are necessary and benefit you in your career.
well, and I wouldn't have anticipated this, but as the environmental movement has evolved and has really matured over the 30 years since I was in school, understanding how business works, understanding how law works, and being able to like credibly appreciate the position that corporations are in becomes really important. Like, I think not fully, but in a lot of ways, the environmental movement has evolved from one that was based purely on the heart or mostly on the heart to one that's originally also based on science, like based on science and the heart, to one that's really integral with business systems. So understanding business systems has certainly helped, being able to speak credibly to business leaders, not just saying this is what you should do, but, I understand your motivations too. I understand how, what you have to do to be profitable, be responsible to your board, and we can achieve our environmental objectives while still allowing you to meet those obligations that you have to shareholders or your board members, your market.
Yeah. That's really interesting because in a lot of the papers we read or like we have to read for classes, it's a lot of businesses are doing it only for profit, economic gain. And then the environmental side where it's like they're destroying the environment, they're not caring about it. So it's cool how you like come together and you try to make a happy median middle ground for both parties because I feel like that's something very difficult to do.
Thanks. And I really believe that. I believe we have to find that middle ground. But I also think if we didn't have environmentalists that were really pushing at the edge of having a strong environmental ethos, doing this for the right planetary reasons, like I've been really lucky to get to work between business and environmental groups to try to make change, but there's no way people like me would get invited into those boardrooms if there were what I call like the pure environmentalists that were creating the space for that. So I really like the way the environmental movement has evolved to there's some of us that are those more, suit and tie negotiating with businesses on their terms and our terms. And there's still a really like quite a vibrant movement of activists, often young activists that are just drawing attention to we're doing really bad things to the planet and businesses have to move way further because at the end of the day, they still are. They're profit motivated. Like we try to help them. We try to help change the market conditions, change the market signals so they can still be profitable while they do the right thing for the environment. Profit still drives them. And we've got to be aware of that. We still like the planet still needs spoken for.
Okay. Well, out of all the jobs that you've had throughout your career, what job do you think best suited your skills and allowed you to grow the most as a professional?
That's a really good question. And I'll give you two answers. So without question, the one I grew the most in was that early job I had as senior policy advisor to the Canadian Environment Minister. And at the time, we were reforming the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, the largest piece of environmental legislation in the country. And we were just coming out of agreeing to be part of the Kyoto Protocol on climate change. So we were trying to create a new climate regime for the country. Like it was so challenging in a job like that where, I'm like a young person, but working for a very important person. And I had access to just the smartest, most interesting environmentalists and business people in the country and sometimes in the world. And I sponged in so much information and knowledge just being around really interesting tables. Like I remember one of my first meetings was a breakfast with Maurice Strong, he was one of the architects of the international sustainable development movement. happens to be a Canadian, but did most of his work internationally. And I'm like, God, like who would think at like 27 years old, I think I was, I'd get to be in like a serious business breakfast negotiation with Maurice Strong. Like I studied him in school. So I grew a lot there. And I also like the cabinet minister I worked with she was a really wonderful conciliator. Christine Stewart was her name. She run a medical nonprofit before getting into politics. She was so good at working with different people. I learned grace, how to kind of argue your point, but not by alienating people, by bringing people in. So I learned a ton there. And I've always said, like, if anyone, like, if you get a chance to work in a political office, it's hard work. It can be really grinding and soul sucking in certain ways, but it is such a development opportunity. So I learned a ton there and I really, really enjoyed it. The other one, it was at Smart Prosperity. Like I ran that organization for 12 years and I learned how hard it is to run an organization. Like we grew a lot. I was there at a time when there was quite a bit of new funding coming available, especially from philanthropy for organizations like ours. I think I would say we were the first organization in Canada that was really, really seriously into the economics of moving the environmental agenda. So it was neat. We were a first mover there, and Stuart Algie, the person who really founded the organization, was our board chair the whole time. Like he was probably one of the earliest people in Canada to identify that need. He had this saying that he's never met a CEO that wakes up in the morning and says, how can I screw over the environment? They do it because it's in their market and business interest to do it. So we've got to change the market and business interest. We started with a really, really strong proposition. So we were able to grow quite a bit, but it's hard running an organization, a nonprofit organization. And like, I think I learned many, many times the hard way of like managing human resources, managing the development of a lot of younger staff, how to, find those compromise positions that we're all comfortable taking when, we realize that the team has a whole bunch of different ethics and ethos on these issues and views on these issues. And yeah, I've never considered myself the most organized person. So running an organization and doing the things that you need, like financial tracking, accountability systems, that was really hard. Yeah, I don't know if I ever totally grew into it. Like you're also there are people that are better at it than I am, and I learned to respect them. Like when you work in big organizations like the federal government or even at the political level, all that stuff is done too. They have all those systems in place. So having a smallish organization where you have to put those systems in place, that was really, really hard. I think I learned a lot. I don't think I learned as much as I should have.
Do you think that there was something special about the Smart Prosperity Institute that made you stay as long as you did? Because by what you're saying, there was many challenges. There's a lot of hard work. It seems like you were working in a number of different fields, it seems, within it. Was there something special about it that made you stay for so long?
Yeah, honestly, Stuart Algie, our board chair, I think he is one of the best environmentalists in the country. He'd been an environmental lawyer initially for much longer than I was. And I think, and I'm kind of making this statistic up, but I think it's true. I think he's won the most Supreme Court cases for the environment of any lawyer in Canada. And then he goes to Yale and gets a PhD in economics and starts Smart Prosperity. Like I've always said, like I'd follow him anywhere. So I really enjoyed working with him. I really like that vision that he created in the space he created for us. And our staff were just excellent. Like, and I always feel like I was educated on these issues at a time when not many people were doing this and the education was quite general. Most of the staff I had advanced degrees from like really amazing universities and programs. And like they knew way more than me about most of the issues we worked on. And I really enjoyed learning as much as I could from them. That's what made the job quite easy. We had really well-regarded staff and we had a good enough reputation as an organization that we could attract really good people. Like our research director, who has now replaced me as the executive director. This guy did a PhD under Jeffrey Sachs. He did his PhD under Jeffrey Sachs. Like he's a genius. So it really was enjoyable working for them. Now, till the day I left and still now, I think Smart Prosperity has one of the most important missions in Canada. Like, how do you bring research credibility, like really hardcore research and economic analysis to these issues? I remember when I started, one of our board members said, she said, never forget, SP is one of the only organizations in the country in the space that does real original research. We don't just do great literature research. We don't repackage research. We do novel research, and we're creating new understanding and new analysis on the issues we work on. And she said, never give that up. Stephanie Cairns, who was in Julie Gelfin's position at Guelph, I think before Julie was, or two before Julie was, really, really smart person. And that was her advice to me. She goes, never forget that we're one of the only organizations that does this sort of original research. Even though I would not consider myself a research expert, I really liked running an organization that was providing something that no one else was providing.
That's
And,
really good.
and it would be my advice to anyone else, like, try to find something that you're doing, something that's quite unique that couldn't be replaced by anyone else. Like, as my wife and I have planned our next step into this youth mental health and nature space, we've really looked hard at what is an issue we care deeply about, but also one that we think nobody else is really, there's a real gap in the system. No one's really providing that now. So that was a really important motivator. And that's why I really liked SP, and it's why I stayed so long.
That's really interesting. Do you find that you would have some sort of way or like method in a healthy work-life balance? Because I know a lot of people can get sucked into their work and take it home with them and just focus on that. Did you find there was a way that you could healthily balance that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. And I think everyone does it differently. Work-life balance was always really important for me. And I think probably at the start of my career, especially working at that political level, because I was the minister's international advisor as well as policy advisor, I was on the road a lot. And I worked really hard hours, like really, really hard hours. And, my wife and I, we didn't have kids at the time. So that was okay. And she was getting her consulting firm going. So we both worked really hard, but I would not say we had that work-life balance we wanted. And when we had kids, we both made a really conscious decision that we want to really be there. We want to be there for the family. So I would say I probably worked fewer hours than the average head of a nonprofit works. I think the hours can be quite brutal, and it's hard to have that work-life balance, but we just made a really deliberate choice that we were going to have it. So yeah, I would, I'd often later in the evenings, but our youngest daughter was a really competitive rock climber, and I'd make sure I was home every day by, 5:30 or 5:15 to take her to rock climbing. We got involved in the same sports as our kids, so we were doing those things together. And that, when your kids are counting on you, that really motivates you to show up. And that's how we got balance into our lives. But like I say, it's different for everyone. Like, that was really important to both my wife and I. So we, probably at times made some work sacrifices in order to do that. But yeah, I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
And so to really directly answer your questions, I think you have to really decide what part does work play in your life, how much you're willing to commit to it, and then fully in talking to the people you work with, see if you can hit that balance. And again, it did help. Like Stuart, my boss, he had a young family, and he really respected those choices that I made. And when I was in government, for my age, I had quite senior positions. And that was always a discussion I had with my bosses before I took a job in government, that this is the way I work. I'm not going to be on my phone every day from, 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. And those are the conditions I work under. And I was lucky. I had bosses that, either respected that or could live with that.
Coming from the other end of that spectrum, dad kind of, not to bring like personal matters into this, but
Okay.
my
No, sure.
dad had the same method. When we were young anyway, he told his bosses, like, family is very important to me. And he would have some hard days at work and he would try and not bring that home. He had about a 40-minute drive home, I believe. So he would call my mom during that time and just kind of decompress, get everything out so he wouldn't be bringing it into the house with all of us. So I can just say from the other end of that perspective that it did mean a lot to us, and it was very like impactful in a way because we just saw our dads as fathers and not so much as business people, and it was really helpful. Sorry to
That's
ramble.
no, that's great. And I hadn't thought that. Yeah, like making that switch from your work moments to your at home moments and having some time to switch gears, I think is a really smart thing. Like, and we both do quite a bit of yoga, and that, like, little things like those mindfulness things, I think can really help you switch the page from, okay, I'm in work mode now. I'm going to switch to not being in work mode, being really able to be present with whoever, with your partner, with your family, or your friends, or whatever you do in your non-work time. I think that's neat that, yeah, your dad's coping mechanism. Yeah, I'm going to call my wife as I go home. This is when I'm going to tell her about the day. But then when I get home, I'm in pure family mode. I love that.
It was really helpful. Okay, just get back a bit more on the professional side. What were some of your biggest accomplishments and joys in your profession, or maybe a job or a project that you're most proud of doing?
I'll give you a couple, and with the caveat that, like any really good thing, I think, like, I was one of many that were involved in it. So an early one, the reason I went into government, the reason I accepted that political job was because we were reforming the Canadian Environment. My one little brief stint as a practicing lawyer, I was the researcher for a couple of lawyers as the Canadian Environmental Protection Act was challenged in the Supreme Court. The Quebec government and a Quebec corporation had challenged the federal government's ability to legislate on the environment. And it was close. Like, we were in a hair's breadth. The provincial appeal court had said the federal government doesn't have the right to be in this environmental space. So we were representing a group of nonprofits that argued that, yes, we did. And we won that case. And I think, in a way, the federal government, I think they would have been at the time almost happy to be rid of it. It cost them a lot of money. It was politically really difficult for them. And so the way I got that job at the federal level is someone had called me and said, okay, you guys won this case. We're stuck with this. Why don't you come and work with us and help make it better? So my first really big task there was to get the new Canadian Environmental Protection Act through the House. And we were trying a really big expansion to it, and mostly around how we make sure that chemicals that are being used in Canada are safe. And it was a 2-year process to reform it. It was highly political. And, like, I think probably at least 8 times our deputy minister said, I think it's dead. I don't think we're going to be able to take it forward. There's too much opposition to it. And so the day it got through the House and Senate and was proclaimed into law, that felt it felt amazing. And I think that's, even though it was early and I was just one player amongst many, that felt like a huge accomplishment. And I did, like, this with my minister. I think we did a good job at building the bridges that we needed to keep it going, because there were a lot of people, especially on the industry side, that wanted to kill it, and a lot of people on the environmental side that thought we should have gone further. So I think we did a good job at keeping the coalition together. And yeah, so that's one. The second one, I would say, when I was at Smart Prosperity, we our big issue for the first 6 years I was there is we believe that if we're going to fight climate change in the country, we need to put a price on carbon. Economists will say that is the most efficient and effective way to get an economy to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, is to price the costs of those emissions into purchasing and industrial decisions. So whether it was a carbon tax or another type of price on carbon, that was our big issue. And we knew when we started, it was a political non-starter. Anne Dion, who'd been a great environment minister, ran for prime minister on a campaign that included a carbon price, and it got creamed. He lost the election badly, and the opposing party, the Conservative Party at the time, they ran a really effective campaign on how this was a job-killing carbon tax. It was going to kill the economy. So here we were thinking, this is the most economically efficient, smart thing that can be done. And yet, politically, it was seen as an economic killer. So we put together the became known as Canada's Eco-Fiscal Commission. We recruited the best blue chip economists in the country, like not environmental economists, mainstream economists. Like, we had a former governor of the Bank of Canada, former deputy minister of finance at the federal level and provincial level. So we recruited all these real economic experts, and then a bunch of political people from across the spectrum, and set up this independent commission that worked for a number of years to try to show and sensitize to politicians, bureaucrats, general public to the extent we could that this was actually a really effective way to fight climate change. And for a moment, remember, Canada did have a price on carbon. Like we managed to convince the government that they should do that. And, for all sorts of valid political reasons, governments have backed off of that. But that felt like both setting up that commission and seeing how effective they were. And it was an arm's length. I had nothing to do with it once it got set up and running. But getting that running, I thought that was a really great contribution. And I think it's the way that policymaking should happen. Like you put bipartisan, cross-partisan experts in a room and do like really roll up their sleeves and figure out how best to do it and get agreement amongst them. It was just a really good model for policymaking. I'll always regret and feel badly that the policy now has gone away, but I think they did a really good job at creating the case for it, and they got the policy through just to last. But yeah, no, I consider that a pretty big accomplishment.
That's awesome. So now that you're semi-retired, are there any projects that you still partake in beside the one that you're starting up with your wife about youth mental health in nature? Like, would you try and do any of those policies again if somebody asked you?
Yeah. So yes, short answer is yes. In my later years at SP, once we launched that Eco-Fiscal Commission, they really took over the carbon pricing issue. As an organization, we got quite into building the economic case and the financing case for nature conservation. And that, I gotta say, like that almost took me back to my very roots in environmentalism. Like I became an environmentalist paddling on the St. John River. Like I was a nature person. And so as an organization, Stuart and I, we pivoted back to nature. And so the last few years we were working on how do you find financing for conservation? And as retired, I've stayed involved in a few of the conservation and restoration projects that we were doing in British Columbia. Like as a province, they're quite very open to Indigenous-led conservation. And one of the real inhibitors of that now is how do Indigenous nations finance their management for conservation of their land, but also given the floods and wildfires, how do we start to restore nature there? So I'm working on a couple of specific conservation projects there and doing a little bit of work with a former colleague on how do you build the economic case for restoring British Columbia's natural environment. It's fun. Like it's a group of people that are quite active in BC. I'm certainly an outsider to the BC scene, but trying to bring in some of that. And then, as I was alluding to, the project on youth mental health and nature, I think that will become a big thing that I want to do. Also, we're doing a little work, some volunteer work with the Friends of Gatineau Parks. That is the park that many people in the National Capital Region use. Doing some work with Friends of Gatineau Park to help improve conservation in the park. And at a really, really practical hands-on level, we're doing some volunteer work for the Ottawa Food Bank. Ottawa has a lot of new Canadians that are coming, and as they find their feet, the number of people that are having food scarcity issues has gone up dramatically in Ottawa. So we're helping the food bank, some just real practical, helping Canadians go through and get the food they need. But we're also doing a little bit of work to help them become maybe a little bit more efficient, be able to attract more donations, be able to service more people. And that feels like it's very, very tangible, more tangible than anything I've ever done. I've tended to law and policy stuff. This feels really applied on the grounds. I like that. We're actually, both my wife, we were heading at 1:00 today to help them organize how they take in food and manage food so that they're not allowing food to expire and be wasted, so that all the donations actually can get used for the purpose that they were intended. So we're doing like a little bit of an inventory management system with them. And we're starting that at 1 this afternoon. So that's fun. And I've become way more passionate about it than I expected, to be honest. I hadn't really thought of food issues before. Like I've thought about food sustainability issues, but never like actually access to food before. It's been really eye-opening and interesting.
That's really interesting. I took a class last semester and somebody did a presentation on food scarcity and how much food was wasted. And then another person did a presentation on, I think, fast fashion as well. And it was really crazy to see how much stuff just gets tossed away and without being used. It was really eye opening.
It's incredible. I won't get the stats right, but I guess it's over half of the food produced ends up getting wasted in landfill. Another, like on the fast fashion, I think I'd heard the average number of wears that a piece of clothing that's produced gets is like 1.7. So I know, isn't that jaw dropping?
That's crazy.
Actually, people wear an article of clothing on average 1.7 times before it's disposed of. So yeah, they're such important issues.
Yeah. That I don't think a lot of people really think about either.
It's, one of the other, it's, about like one of the other things that I'm really proud of, and I was lucky to be part of this. I don't know if you know the organization, the Natural Step Canada. It's a systems change organization. Like, how do you change big systems to make them more sustainable? They had a wonderful new president. David Hughes is the fellow's name. He'd be an interesting one to interview. He's had a fascinating career. He ran the YMCA Canada, Pathways to Education Canada, now Natural Step. He wanted to turn that into an organization that focused on like a series of individual issues. So I worked with him. We were in very close partnership. So we worked to launch the Canadian Agriculture Net Zero Alliance, Canadian Alliance for Net Zero Agriculture. We did another one around circular economy that was looking at fashion and waste from textiles. We did one on nature investment, like all these, they call them little labs, solution spaces, I guess they call them, and getting all the players in a system together to try to make the food system more sustainable, which is what CANSA does. Make the waste systems more circular so waste gets reused, whether it's like construction waste or clothing waste. And they've grown so quickly, and they're taking on these like really complex issues. And it's what triggered me is when you said most people don't know about them. They don't. And other than the players that are deep in that system. So he's really helped through these, like, to elevate the issue of food waste, to elevate the issue of, textile or really construction waste is the one they're focusing on there. And it's been neat to see that organization grow and prosper so much because they do really, truly complex stuff. I think one of the things that I've learned is for all these issues we work on, it's very easy to skate at the really high level on them, but we have to embrace the complexity of these systems and these issues. And they're just absolute experts at that. It's been cool to see.
Okay. So for my last question today, it is any advice you have for maybe a graduating class like myself who are trying to get into the professional space? Do you have any advice on maybe how to find a job, interview tips, anything like that? Because to be honest, I am quite nervous about finding my first professional job.
So I think whether finding a job or setting yourself up for a career, the absolute number one thing that we should all be doing through grad school is building our in-person networks. Like, so much of life is online now that it's become less natural to just get out there and meet people. And I think grad school is a really unique environment to meet people, attend conferences, attend networking events. We started a grad program at University of Ottawa through, what was it, Smart Prosperity. The opportunity of these, 20 students that come through a year to be around really smart professors, all these guests that come in, all of these events that happen in Ottawa that they could attend for free. And especially as a student, you're so welcome to these things. I'd always encourage the students, like, get out there and meet as many people as possible. It'll be awkward at first, but develop those social connecting skills. And I still think that, like, jobs come from, it's not nepotism, but it is, you make a connection with someone, they like what they see in you, and they want to open doors for you because they think you're a bright, interesting individual who puts who puts yourself out there. And it's so easy now not to do that. But yeah, so yeah, it's so sorry, but I say it's develop your network in a really sincere way, not in a a handshakey artificial way, but like get to know people, get to know them well, and do things for them, show your value, and that like the people I've seen that are most successful at that entry level, they're just really good at being around people, and they're willing to do it. They take some risks to do it.
That's what Julie was saying as well in the first couple of classes we had in preparation for this podcast assignment. It was essentially just classes about networking. And she was like, the people, if you go and you talk to somebody in person and you try to make that connection and you put yourself out there, that's going to get you a job or at least make them think of you when a job comes up so much more than just applying online because there's that personable connection there.
Yeah. And Julie was a master. Julie was so good at that. Like through all of the different jobs she had, she just connects with people really well and she puts effort into it.
Yeah. So that's all the questions I had for this interview. Did you have any for me or just one?
No, that was wonderful. And I think it's great you're doing this. I am curious, and I don't know if this doesn't have to be part of the podcast, but how are you planning to use this? Like, how will you get this out to people?
So I know that they're getting some music students to make music for the podcast. We, as far as I'm aware, just have to edit it down. They add the music, and then a grad student is going to be posting it elsewhere. I can ask Julie about it because I'm not so sure of the specifics. I'm not sure anybody is, but I know it will get posted somewhere.
One person, and you can edit this out, but Eric Campbell, who runs Clean Economy, is the Clean Economy Funding Group now. He used to be our communications director, and he started a podcast for us right from scratch. And he's had a really interesting career, but also could give you some probably really good advice on how you start. We were on a threadbare budget for that thing. So he was really good at figuring out how we could do something like that to be impactful, but within the resources we had. I think a really interesting interview for this. And I don't know if Julie would know him well or would have thought of him, but he'd be good.
Okay. I will keep that in mind. Thank you. I might email her about it. Okay.
All right.
So I'm going to just stop the recording